We continue to follow breaking news in Mexico. A powerful earthquake has struck about 150 miles outside Mexico City in Puebla. NBC's Steve Patterson is following this from Los Angeles, where we are getting video in and reports. What have we got, Steve?
So the epicenter so far is reported to be in a town called Rebozo, as you mentioned, a few miles outside of Mexico City. But just look at the aftermath there in Mexico City. This is a 7.1 quake. It comes on the anniversary of an 8.0 quake back in 1985. That quake devastated Mexico City. Thousands of people dead, billions of dollars in damage. And just look at the images that are now coming in on this quake. It is not a good sign when you see parts of a major city, a major metropolitan city like Mexico City, reduced to rubble right after the quake. That's the images that are coming in. We've got user video of, you saw that newsroom shot of just offices shaking, items falling off. People trying to run and scramble to get underneath desks to protect themselves in any way they could. And then outside, we're starting to see images of chaos, buildings reduced to rubble, people crying and wondering what's going on. This quake, as we mentioned, about 76 miles outside of Mexico City, that area is built on a lake bed, which tends to amplify the effects of earthquakes. So this 7.1 in some areas may be much worse in this area. So far, we know the Mexican president has activated a major disaster declaration for this quake. We know the governor in that region has said so far they have had no reports of loss of life or injuries. But just looking at the images, it's pretty clear that that's going to change pretty quickly here. We've seen crews on the ground. We've seen, as you mentioned, you're looking at people scrambling during this quake. It seemed to be a long, sustained quake that did a lot of damage in a very short amount of time with violent tremors that sent people fleeing and looking for any sort of help. No reports yet, again, of any injuries, of any deaths at this point. But again, look at the images we're seeing. The facades totally wiped off of buildings. Church steeples taken and reduced and just destroyed and ripped off the side, thrown to the ground, people scrambling and crying and trying to figure out what the situation is on the ground. That's work that's being done as we speak, as crews make their way in there to identify and take account of exactly what happened. We also know the Mexico Stock Exchange has suspended trading because of this quake. So there already are the effects of this widespread damage that's being reported in Mexico City, the effects and the devastation of which we will find out in the coming minutes and hours. Alex.
All right, Steve, stay in close touch with us on this story. Steve Patterson following the quake in Mexico from Los Angeles as we're gathering more information. It's a 7.1 quake. Joining me on the phone is Lucy Jones. She's a seismologist at the Dr. Lucy Jones Center for Science and Society. Lucy, what do you make of the information that you've got on this quake so far?
Well, what we're seeing is an earthquake within the slab below Mexico. So it's relatively close to Mexico City, and as your previous reporter was saying, Mexico City soils amplify shaking and make every earthquake quite a bit worse. It's not very far away. It's only about 80 miles from the center of Mexico City. It's deep, so it's about 30 miles below the surface of the earth, but it's a pretty large earthquake. It's actually similar in tectonic sense to the 8 that happened a couple of weeks ago. I think it's far enough away that it's not a direct aftershock, but it might be related.
What do people who don't experience earthquakes have to know about a 7.1? What does that mean?
Okay, the magnitude tells you how big a fault moved in the earthquake, because it's the total energy released in the earthquake, and that comes from every point on the fault surface. So a 7 means you've got a fault that's at least about 30 or 40 miles long. You know, it might have ruptured towards Mexico City, which might explain higher levels of shaking there. It's also going to last for a pretty long time. A magnitude 7 is going to last for at least 20 to 30 seconds that the Earth is producing energy. And it's going to have aftershocks. One thing about a deeper earthquake, they tend to have somewhat fewer aftershocks, so that might not be as bad a problem this time. But people need to expect to be feeling more earthquakes.
That is, I think, after you've been shaken, no pun intended, by the first one, you're so anxious about remaining tremors. But we'll have to keep a close eye on that because it is expected. Lucy, thanks very much, Dr. Lucy Jones, seismologist, giving us some information on this earthquake in Mexico City, a 7.1. In Mexico City. It's outside of Mexico, southeast of Mexico City, but the shaking and the damage, as you've seen, is being felt in the most populous city on the continent.